Private First Class Danny Martinez, 1st Marine Division, is walking point with 68 pounds of napalm strapped to his back. He's carrying the weapon that won 3 wars and then got memory hold so hard you've probably never even heard of it. It's August 1968, somewhere west of Da Nang, and the tanks are rattling. That's the thing nobody tells you about the M2A17 flamethrower. The fuel tanks rattle, metal on metal, a sound that carries in the jungle like a fucking dinner bell. Every VC sniper within 200 meters knows exactly what he's carrying, and they know the math. One trace around through those tanks, and Martinez doesn't just die, he burns. The fuel smells sweet, chemical sweet. Gasoline mixed with polystyrene, napalm, thick enough to stick to skin, but fluid enough to spray. Martinez has been smelling it for 3 weeks straight. It's soaked into his uniform, his skin, his hair. When he sweats, which is constantly in this 100-degree meat grinder, the fabric releases the fumes. He's breathing it, tasting it, probably pissing it at this point. His squad is 50 meters ahead, moving fast through elephant grass. He can't keep pace. The 68 pounds feels like 90. His rifleman, the poor bastard assigned to keep him alive, keeps glancing back, irritated because Martinez is slowing everyone down. 7 seconds. That's how much fuel he's carrying. 7 seconds of fire. Then he's hauling dead weight through hostile territory with a giant neon "Shoot Me First" sign on his back. Martinez didn't volunteer for this. Nobody volunteers for flamethrower duty. You get assigned, and the second you are, the other guys in your unit start looking at you different, because they've seen the casualty reports. In 1967, the Marine Corps tracked casualty rates by MOS, Military Occupational Specialty. Riflemen had a 15% casualty rate over a standard tour. Machine gunners, 19%. Combat engineers clearing mines, 31%. Flamethrower operators, MOS 1371, had a 63% casualty rate. 63%. Think about that math for a second. If you lined up 10 flamethrower operators at the start of a deployment, statistically, 6 of them wouldn't make it home. The Corps knew this. They had the numbers. They assigned men anyway and threw in extra R&R time just to keep guys from deserting. This is the weapon the U.S. military used for 30 years across 3 wars and then quietly pretended never existed. So let's talk about what 68 pounds actually means when you're humping through the jungle in triple-digit heat with humidity you could drown in. The average combat load for an infantryman in Vietnam was 40 to 50 pounds. Rifle, ammo, grenades, water, rations, the usual. 68 pounds is what M60 gunners carried, and those guys were built like refrigerators. But machine gunners could engage from 300 meters out. They didn't have to walk into knife-fighting distance to do their job. 20 meters. That's the effective range of the M2A17, not the Hollywood 100-foot dragon breath you see in movies. 20 goddamn meters, the length of a bowling lane. Which means Martinez had to get close enough to see faces, close enough that when he pulled the trigger and that stream of burning gel arced through the air and splashed against the bunker entrance, he could hear the screaming. And here's the kicker. He only got 7 seconds of fuel, maybe 9 if he was stingy. The M2A17 held 4.75 gallons of thickened fuel. Compressed nitrogen pushed it through the wand at high pressure. When you fired, it came out fast, 20 meters in about a second and a half. But you couldn't just hold the trigger and go full dragon. You fired in bursts, 2-second stream to hit the target. Stop, check if they're still shooting back, fire again if needed. Most operators got 3, maybe 4 good bursts before the tanks were dry. Then you were carrying 68 pounds of empty steel through a firefight while being priority target number 1 for every machine gunner in the area. The training manual, written by some logistics officer who'd never carried the damn thing, said you could swap tanks in the field. Just drop the empty tank group and clip on a fresh one. In theory, this took 90 seconds. In practice, under fire, with your hands shaking and adrenaline jacking your fine motor skills to hell and your squad screaming at you to hurry the fuck up because there's still a bunker hosing them with machine gun fire, nobody ever hit 90 seconds. And most units didn't even carry spare tanks because they weighed 40 pounds each and required a dedicated resupply guy who could have been humping ammo or medical supplies instead. So you got your 7 seconds. That was the deal. Make 'em count, because if you missed, if the napalm hit dirt instead of threading that firing port, you just announced your position to everyone with a gun and you were now carrying an explosive liability on your back. Martinez missed twice in his first month. Both times, his squad had to suppress the bunker with rifle fire while he repositioned for another shot. Both times, his squad leader told him if he missed again, they'd shoot him themselves and save the VC the trouble. And this was still the safest way to use fire in Vietnam. By 1965, the Army brass had figured out that sending guys like Martinez into close combat with backpack flamethrowers was bleeding through operators faster than they could train replacements. The solution? Peak 1960s military logic. If something's too dangerous, make it bigger. The M132 Zippo was built on an M113 armored personnel carrier chassis. They gutted the troop compartment, installed 200 gallons of napalm, and bolted an M10-8 flame gun onto a rotating turret. Range, 200 meters. Burn time, 32 seconds of continuous fire. The troops called it Zippo because, just like the lighter, it worked every time. Here's what the history books skip over. The Zippo crews loved their jobs and hated them in equal measure. That contradiction haunted some of them for decades. Spec 4 Robert Chen, 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, operated a Zippo during the Iron Triangle operations in 1967. 30 years later, in an oral history interview, he described it like this. You're sitting in an aluminum box with 200 gallons of jellied gasoline sloshing behind you. The engine's running, temp inside is pushing 120. You can smell the napalm through the ventilation system. And you fucking know that if someone gets lucky with an RPG in the wrong spot, you don't burn to death, you vaporize. Instant pink mist and a fireball they'll see from orbit. But when it worked, when they rolled up on a VC tree line and fired that wet burst, unignited napalm coating everything like syrup from hell, and then followed it up with ignited flame? Shen said, it was like watching God erase something from existence. The entire tree line would just disappear. 100-meter stretch of jungle turned to ash in 30 seconds. You'd sit there in that metal oven, watching it burn, knowing you just killed people in the most horrible way human beings have ever invented. And then command would radio in the next grid coordinate, and you'd drive there and do it again. The Zippos operated in platoons. 3 flame vehicles, 2 standard M113s for infantry support, and an XM45E1 refueling truck. Because here's the logistical reality the brass didn't advertise. 200 gallons sounds like a lot until you're torching jungle for 8 hours straight. The refuel trucks were critical. Without them, the Zippos ran dry in 3, maybe 4 engagements, which created its own problem. The refuel trucks became priority target alpha for every VC ambush team in country. The VC figured this out by mid-1967. After that, ambushes followed a pattern. Hit the fuel truck first with RPGs, then wait for the Zippos to run dry and become useless armored paperweights, then pick them off. November 1967. Operation Shenandoah 2. A Zippo platoon rolled into a tree line outside Loc Ninh. Standard burn operation. Clear the vegetation, expose any bunkers. The refuel truck took an RPG to the cab 30 seconds into the engagement. Driver dead, truck burning. The Zippos had enough fuel for maybe 2 more minutes of fire. They burned what they could and retreated. The VC overran the position 6 hours later. Even the safe way to use flamethrowers had a glaring weakness, and the enemy knew it. But the backpack flamethrower was dying. The fire was about to get bigger. Now let's talk about what napalm actually does, not the sanitized DoD version, the real thing. Napalm is gasoline mixed with a thickening agent, originally aluminum soaps, later polystyrene. The consistency lands somewhere between syrup and jelly. When it burns, it hits 1500 to 2200 degrees Fahrenheit. When it hits human skin, it doesn't just burn, it sticks. You can't wipe it off. Water doesn't work. Napalm floats and keeps burning. The only way to stop it is to smother it completely. Sand, dirt, your own body if you're trying to save someone else. Third-degree burns are the minimum with napalm. Fire penetrates skin, through subcutaneous fat down to muscle, sometimes bone. Nerve endings get destroyed, which sounds like mercy until you realize the surrounding tissue, where nerves still work, is experiencing the worst pain human physiology can produce. But here's the part the tactical manuals bury in footnotes. Most napalm victims didn't die from burns. They died from asphyxiation. When you fire a flamethrower into an enclosed space, bunker, tunnel, concrete room, the fire doesn't just burn, it eats the oxygen, all of it. A 7-second burst in a confined space drops oxygen levels to near zero in under 30 seconds. Soldiers 50 meters inside a tunnel complex would asphyxiate without ever seeing the flames. They'd start feeling dizzy, confused, then they'd pass out, then they'd stop breathing. U.S. Army medical examiners in Vietnam documented this repeatedly in post-action autopsies. Bodies recovered from bunkers after flamethrower attacks often showed minimal burn damage, but their blood was cherry red, carbon monoxide poisoning. They died breathing superheated air with no oxygen, their lungs cooking from the inside. Martinez used his flamethrower 11 times in Vietnam. He killed an estimated 40 to 60 enemy combatants. He never saw most of them, just fired into tunnel entrances and bunker firing ports, and walked away while the oxygen disappeared. That's the thing about flamethrowers nobody wants to say out loud. They're not just a weapon. They're a method of execution that happens to be tactically effective. May 8, 1967, Con Tien Marine Base just south of the DMZ. 2:30 in the morning, North Vietnamese sappers breached the wire and got inside the perimeter. Standard sapper playbook, satchel charges, AK-47s, grenades, chaos. The Marines were pushing them back, bunker by bunker. Then the sappers pulled out flamethrowers, Soviet LPO-50s, Chinese Type 74s, lighter than American models, 44 pounds versus 68, better range, 50 to 70 meters versus 20, but only 3 shots before empty. Now imagine you're a Marine in a bunker at Con Thien. You've spent weeks getting used to being the side with overwhelming firepower. You've watched Zippos torch entire grid squares. You've heard the stories about VC getting burned out of tunnels. And suddenly there's a stream of fire coming through your firing port. The NVA sappers used them perfectly. They didn't try to burn bunkers down. They used fire to suppress the Marines inside. Quick bursts through the firing ports to force everyone away from their weapons, while demolition teams placed satchel charges on the bunker roofs. The Marines held Con Thien, but the psychological damage lasted months. After-action reports describe Marines refusing to stay in bunkers during subsequent attacks. They'd rather fight exposed in the open than risk being trapped inside when the flames came through. Martinez's unit heard about Con Thien 3 months later. After that, every time they approached a bunker complex, the riflemen would hang back an extra 10 meters, just in case the target decided to fire back with the same weapon Martinez was carrying. The North Vietnamese understood something American command was slow to admit. Flamethrowers weren't really about destroying fortifications. They were about creating terror so visceral it overrode training and discipline. And terror doesn't care which uniform you're wearing. June 8, 1972. Route 1, South Vietnam. Village of Trang Bang. A South Vietnamese Sky Raider dropped napalm. The pilot thought he was hitting an NVA position. He wasn't. It was a village packed with civilians fleeing the fighting. AP photographer Nick Ut was there with his camera. He captured a 9-year-old girl named Phan Thi Kim Phuc running naked down the road. Her clothes had burned off. Her skin was peeling away in sheets. That photograph won a Pulitzer Prize. It also killed the political viability of every incendiary weapon in the American arsenal. The photo went everywhere. Front pages, evening news, magazine covers. It became the defining image of the war's brutality, the single frame that summed up everything the anti-war movement had been screaming about. And here's the thing, it wasn't even a flamethrower. It was aerial napalm. Different delivery system, different tactical purpose. But the American public didn't give a damn about distinctions. They saw a child burned by American weapons, and the backlash was immediate and permanent. Military planners tried to salvage it. They argued napalm and flamethrowers were legitimate against military targets, that they saved American lives by clearing fortified positions without risking infantry in close combat. But you can't PR spin a 9-year-old girl with her skin burned off. That argument died the second the photo hit newsstands. Kim Phuc survived. 17 surgeries, permanent scarring, chronic pain for the rest of her life. She became a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador decades later, speaking about reconciliation and peace. But the weapon's reputation never recovered. After 1972, using visible incendiary weapons became politically impossible. The CNN effect, constant media coverage of modern warfare, turned flamethrowers from force multipliers into PR catastrophes the Pentagon couldn't afford. The United States military stopped using flamethrowers in 1978. Not because international law required it. Protocol 3 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which restricted incendiary weapons, didn't come into force until 1980, and even then it didn't ban flamethrowers outright. The U.S. chose to stop using them because they'd become more trouble than they were worth. Tactically, they were being replaced. The M202 flash rocket launcher could deliver incendiary warheads from 200 meters without requiring a soldier to walk into grenade range with fuel tanks on his back. Thermobaric weapons, fuel-air explosives, could collapse bunkers using overpressure instead of visible fire. But the real reason? Simpler than that. Every photograph of a flamethrower in action became anti-war propaganda. Every burn victim became a symbol. The weapon that once represented technological superiority now represented everything the public had turned against. So they were quietly retired. M132 Zippos pulled from service. Portable units destroyed or shipped to museums. Doctrine rewritten. By 1980, soldiers entered service never having seen a flamethrower except in history books or war movies. Vietnam was the last war where American forces used liquid fire as a standard weapon. The last war where streams of burning napalm were part of normal combat operations. The last war where guys like Martinez walked point with 68 pounds of death rattling on their backs. There's a weapons museum at Fort Benning. They've got an M2A7 flamethrower on display behind velvet ropes. The placard describes it as a specialized weapon for clearing fortifications. Sounds professional, sterile, safe. What the placard doesn't say, the weapon weighed 68 pounds, 7-second fuel capacity, 20-meter effective range. Operators had a 63% casualty rate, 4 times higher than regular infantry. Priority target for every enemy within earshot. It doesn't mention that most kills weren't from fire. They were from asphyxiation as the flames ate all the oxygen. It doesn't talk about the burn wards, the 17 surgeries, the skin grafts harvested from the parts of your body that didn't burn and stretched over the parts that did. And it definitely doesn't mention that we still use incendiary weapons. White phosphorus munitions, thermobaric bombs, high-explosive incendiary rounds. We didn't stop burning people out of fortifications. We just started doing it from 30,000 feet instead of 20 meters. From 30,000 feet, you can't hear the screaming. You can't smell the napalm. You can't watch them burn. And you don't have to carry it home the way Danny Martinez did. Wars don't abandon weapons because they stop working. They abandon them because someone finally looks at what working actually means. Private First Class Danny Martinez made it home from Vietnam. Honorable discharge. No physical wounds. He never talked about the flamethrower. When his son found his combat photographs in the garage 30 years later and asked what he did in the war, Martinez said, "I cleared bunkers." He didn't say how. His son didn't ask. And maybe that's the real legacy of the flamethrower, not the tactical effectiveness or the strategic liability, but the silence of the men who carried it. Because some things you don't talk about, you just carry them and hope that's enough.